I will just get that started. So very excited to have you here, Dr. Steves. Paulette Steves is a PhD Cree Métis person as an Indigenous archaeologist. She was born in Whitehorse, the Yukon Territories, and grew up in Lillooet, British Columbia. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, honors cum laude from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville in 2000. In 2008, she was awarded the Clifford D. Clark Fellowship for Graduate Studies at Binghamton University and New York State. She successfully defended her dissertation in 2015. Dr. Steves has taught in Canada and the USA, focusing on Native American and First Nations histories and decolonization of academia and knowledge production. She's a professor in geography, geology, and land stewardship at Algoma University and the chair of faculty of cross-cultural studies. Dr. Steves was awarded a 5-year Canada Research Chair Tier 2 in Healing and Reconciliation in 2019 to 2024 and 2024 to 2029. Dr. Steves' primary research focuses on the Western Hemisphere's Indigenous Paleolithic and Healing and Reconciliation. Her book, The Indigenous Paleolithic of the Western Hemisphere, was published in July 2021 and was awarded an American Library Association Choice 2022 Outstanding Academic Title Award. Today, Dr. Steves will be sharing her work on recreating Terra Preta soils in the north. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to you, Dr. Steves.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. Tansi, hello everyone. Let me share my screen and get my PowerPoint up. Oh, give me a second here. You can see my messy screen. Oh my goodness. There we go. Every time I put it into present mode, something messes up, so I'm just going to leave it here. So everybody can see my screen all right?
We can see your full PowerPoint, including the slides on the left.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay,
It
good.
always messes up when I try to put it to full screen for some reason on Zoom, so
Very good.
I'm going to
Good
play it
luck.
safe.
Yeah.
Okay, so as mentioned, I'm an Indigenous archaeologist. My field site is a little larger than most archaeologists' research area. It's all of North and South America. But in 1988, I was leaving Lillooet, a newly divorced single parent with 3 children, 26 cents in a truck and a grade 8 education. And I went to visit with an elder, Leonard Sampson, who'd known my family for a long time. And he told me that the elders had watched me grow up and they felt that I had a job to do that would be really important, that would really support Indigenous people. But he said it would be really hard, even harder than what I was going through at the time. And at the time, I couldn't imagine that, anything harder. But when I was graduating with my PhD in 2015, I realized, oh, this is what they meant. I just have to rewrite the history of the Americas. No problem, I got this. So I realized his message and my place in this research. So I introduced myself as an Indigenous person first and a researcher second to highlight the focus of my work. But in my archaeological work, I learned about some very interesting research going on in South America on what they call Terra Preta soils. And this research was done by started by archaeologists. So when they were excavating sites that they felt were really important. So the history of South America was written by settler archaeologists who claimed that there were never many people there. There were no great civilizations because they didn't have the food to do, they didn't have the soils to do agriculture. They couldn't do agriculture and support large populations. But these archaeologists proved them wrong. And they were flying over an area of Bolivia and noticed really long linear lines in a field, and they realized they had to be human made. So they went back and began investigating, and they found throughout the Amazon, in all of the countries in the Amazon, there were huge civilizations. There were roads built everywhere. There were large remnants of large structures, large cities, and they realized that this is what some of the early Spaniards may have been talking about when they talked about the gold in the Amazon and the secrets of El Dorado. So there is a really good video online. It's here on my screen. It's called The Secret of El Dorado, the Discovery of Biochar. So they actually rewrote the human history of the Amazon based on finding these Terra Preta soils, and then afterwards finding these large areas where people, thousands and thousands of people had been living, had been doing agriculture, aquaculture. So it's really a beautiful story how we can use things like archaeology to rewrite Indigenous histories and to correct history. So Indigenous knowledge was gathered from the soil. It was documented by archaeologists. They now are documenting sites with the Indigenous communities and continually rewriting the history of the Indigenous people and the great civilizations in the Amazon. So one thing about the Terra Preta soils, here you can see the top of the soil in these pictures is very black. And this is Terra Preta soil. They have found that Terra Preta soil actually regenerates itself over years. So you can take 10 to 20 to 40 centimeters of Terra Preta soil off the top of a pile, and in 10 years it will be back. They have not yet figured out how the soil regenerates itself. They're working on that, but they understand it is a living soil. The map in the middle shows some of the areas where Terra Preta soils have been documented, and you can see they're all along the Amazon and the tributaries of the Amazon because people lived by rivers. And when early Spaniards went into these areas, they described cities that were miles long with millions of people. That was all erased by later archaeologists at the Smithsonian's. It is now reclaimed as we have the proof both from the soil and from the archaeological sites that there were very large civilizations in the Amazon. So what they call the dark earths, they're higher in nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. They're very, very rich. These are anthropomorphic, or human-created soils that grew a lot of food for Indigenous peoples in the Amazon, early people in the Amazon. This is my front yard. I think this was last year. So I got a small grant 5 years ago when I first started at Algoma University. I had read about the Terra Preta soils and I wondered, they've done research that shows that in the Amazon, where the soils are very poor because of the constant rains, that Terra Preta soils actually grow up to 800 times the food crop of a regular soil. And I thought that's amazing. And if Indigenous people, early Indigenous people did this for thousands of years, why can't we do it here? I didn't know if it would work in the north where we have a shorter growing season, but I thought I would try. So I got a very small seed grant and I did a pilot project in my yard. This cute little house looked absolutely picture perfect when I bought it, with a beautiful lawn and beautiful walkways, and now it's covered in over 22 raised bed boxes everywhere, front yard, side yard, backyard. But I started a project where I had eight of the raised beds. I created a Terra Preta soil. So to create that soil, I had students help me make pottery, because in Terra Preta soils, in the Amazon, there's a large amount of broken pottery. There's a lot of organic waste and residue from organic waste. So a lot of pottery, a lot of waste, and a lot of charcoal. So just from burnt trees. So Terra Preta soil there has charcoal, it has pottery, it has bone, it has organic materials, and it regenerates itself somehow. So I recreated a Terra Preta soil here. I burned wood in my backyard. I added a lot of charcoal, all the broken pottery that the students and I made, and lots of different organic waste, natural organic waste. I also had the rest of my beds were regular soil. So I grew the same crops in 8 beds of regular soil that I grew in the 8 beds of Terra Preta soil. I had a student here who collected and weighed and measured every single bean, over 200 pounds of beans, measured and weighed all of the carrots, the beets, and the tomatoes, and the corn, the main crops, and the squash that I was growing in the Terra Preta. I did find that we got at least, even in the first year, a 6% higher by weight and count food crop in the Terra Preta soil. So it was clear that this would work here. And in tasting the foods from the Terra Preta soils had a richer taste. They tasted better. I had one tomato that weighed a pound. It looked like a baby watermelon. I had corn that was 18 feet high. Here's oops, a little head of lettuce. So this is lettuce in the Terra Preta soil, right? The lettuce grown in the regular soil wasn't near this big. I grew watermelons, cantaloupe, squash, peppers. Each year I tried different crops, and all of the crops in the Terra Preta soil did much better. This is a crop in the middle there of kale that was about 5 feet tall. It was like a little mini forest. There was so much, I eventually had to cut it all, and I brought it to the Harvest Algoma, and they made it into food. I grew all kinds of peppers, delicate peppers, regular peppers, green peppers. And what you see on the stairs here is the food that was hiding in one box under leaves. So one box had a lot of squash in it. It grew over to other boxes. But when I cleared them out last fall, I found all this food hiding on the ground between the boxes and under the leaves in the boxes. So I was like, oh my God. There was carrots, there was beets, there was, I think those are artichokes, there was squash, there were pumpkins. There was a square pumpkin because he grew squished between 2 boxes. So it's everything that grows in this soil grows extremely well and grows to a greater degree. So we weighed and measured all the food, and what did we do with it? Well, I gave a lot of it away. So the picture in the middle here, you can see the corn is higher than the second roof of my house, pretty much. Normally you wouldn't grow corn in a raised bed, but I wanted to try it in the Terra Preta soil, and it just did amazingly well. So I have sunflowers every year, and they're not in raised beds, but wherever I put them, I add a little bit of Terra Preta soil, and I've had sunflowers growing over 40 feet tall in my yard. I've had, since starting this, a lot of plants show up on their own. Seeds in the wind, birds, whatever, they recognize a friendly place, and I have all these medicinal plants that I didn't plant showing up, and all these flowers that I didn't plant showing up. So that's a benefit that I never expected. On the left here, you can see a table with food. So I have one area of raised beds, and I try to really share this with people so they understand you don't need a big yard or a big space to have a raised bed garden. I have an area on the outside of the fence that goes down sort of like on the left side of my house here, there's a fence. And it's about 1 foot wide before we get to the neighbor's driveway. And in that 1 foot wide space, it's about 36 feet long and 1 feet wide beds. And in those beds, I grew beans, and those beans grew up the fence. So the bean roots had plenty of space to grow. It was just a foot wide, but it was deep enough. We got in the first year over 200 pounds of beans from that small space. And I would put an ad on Facebook. I'd put a table out with all kinds of food, bags to put it in, cucumbers, tomatoes, beans, squash, peppers, pretty much everything that I grew. And people would come by and they were so appreciative. They'd leave me notes of thank you. And one guy came by and he said, "Why are you giving away your food?" And I said, "Well, why not? I grow plenty of food. I can't eat it all. I can't freeze and preserve it all. Some of it I do. But what if everybody did this? Could you imagine the richness of food we would have? There wouldn't be food insecurity." I had people coming from some of the local First Nations communities specifically interested in squash and beans. and everybody was very happy to get free food. I've always like had this thought in the back of my mind, is the city going to come and try and give me a ticket or something or a fine? But they've never bothered me. So far it's gone very well. But based on my pilot project, I applied for a grant with Harvest Algoma as a co-partner last year, and we got the grant. So the grant was to um, test Terra Preta soils, 50% Terra Preta soils, and a regular soil, which is compost. So to do the whole thing again on a larger scale. So we have a big greenhouse up at Harvest Algoma here in Sault Ste. Marie. In this greenhouse, I have 16 raised beds. 4 with Terra Preta, 4 with 50% Terra Preta. Actually, sorry, I have more, and 4 with regular soil, and then 4 with the same levels of soil. So we will grow carrots, beets, beans, squash, and tomatoes. When they're grown, we hope to get them tested for nutritional analysis. So I want to see in this greenhouse, do they still grow a larger crop in Terra Preta soil? But are the nutrients in the vegetables between a regular soil and a Terra Preta soil any different? I'm still trying to find a lab that will work on me with doing this. That's been a little difficult. Some of them are quite pricey. So the picture on the left here is one of my research assistants and myself, and we're mixing a huge amount of broken pottery in with charcoal. So this is charcoal that has nothing in it. It's called block charcoal. You can buy this at most stores, and there's no additives, there's nothing. It's simply burned wood. So a lot of people and corporations today are making what they call biochar, and it's very expensive. But to me, biochar, while I think it's likely very helpful for many people and for agriculture, it is not what the Indigenous people did. They didn't make biochar. They burned trees and added charcoal. So that's what I'm doing. I'm adding a pure raw charcoal. I'm adding pottery. I'm adding compost and mixing it all together. And it's all precisely measured, so we know exactly how to do each mix and each raised bed. In the bottom of the beds, I also add wood so that we have a little bit of a drainage area. I learned from a student from Nepal that they grow big gardens there, even though it's very cold, but they always have wood on the bottom of their gardens. And I thought that's probably pretty important. And this is what I do in my own raised beds, is I add roughage and branches and leaves so that there's a little bit of a drainage area. In the greenhouse beneath the beds touch on the soil because we want to be able to attract worms and other good insects into the soil. So besides the raised beds at Harvest Algoma, we'll have 16 raised beds. Thessalon First Nation has a greenhouse north of Thessalon in a forest area. They have fields and greenhouses. We'll have 16 raised beds there. And at the food bank farm, we're going to have 16 mounds with Three Sisters gardens, corn, beans, and squash. So those are vegetables that we will also test. And the 16 mounds will have the 3 different types of soil. So one thing that I'm adding, and I didn't even do this in my own raised beds here, this is worm droppings. And so you make a tea from the worm droppings and you add that tea to the Terra Preta soil. So I got a larger amount of produce in my own raised beds without this step, but this is an important step. It highlights and adds to the organics. And what the pottery is claimed to do is that it gives micronutrients a place to live and it retains moisture. So in the Amazon, they made huge, dense, thick pots, really big pots. So we're going to be making pots here this spring as soon as the snow is out of the way, and then breaking them all up to add to the soils. Oh, that's that one. Here's some more pictures of my soils. So some of the beds were filled up last fall and then it snowed. I have this all is sitting up there covered in big heavy tarps. So as soon as the snow is gone, we'll be back up there mixing our soils again. And these are some of the little pots my students and I made that are in my garden. So we got a local clay and we added sand to this clay and water. We had the art professor here at Algoma University help us, and we made over 100 of these little pots, and I fired them in my backyard in an open fire. So how pottery was made in the Amazon was it was fired in fire, in pits or in open. So I did the same thing. So one of the main things I try to teach people when I talk about this is that you don't need to spend a lot of money. You don't need to buy expensive products. Everything that you need to make a Terra Preta soil, which my pilot project showing works to create a larger crop, you have it in your backyards. You have clay, you have sand, you can make fire, you have wood, you can make compost. So you can buy compost if you want. For my larger projects, I've bought many bags of compost, but everything that you need to do this, you already have. And so just like the indigenous people in the Amazon, everything they needed was there. So on the left here, you can see this is what the charcoal looks like when you take it out of the bags, the block charcoal, and you can chop it up with a shovel and break it up a bit. One of my assistants had been at an event where they had a bunch of unfired pottery they were going to throw away, and it wasn't thick, but it was pottery. So they brought it up and we smashed it all into the soil. So the pottery and the charcoal is sitting there sort of germinating. It's been sitting there all winter, just making an enriched mix. So this I'm very grateful for the funding I received from, it's called OMFRA for this project. And one other thing we've done here at Algoma University is there's a small area of the forest across from the Science Center. And speaking to the elders, they said they used to play there a lot. It's not an area where they can remove the trees and build anything because that's not allowed. That forest piece has to stay. So I hired an Anishinaabe student and we documented as many as we could, every plant in this one forest area. We had 42 transects that were 3 feet apart, and they were probably 200 to 300 feet long or longer. So we documented all the indigenous and all the invasive species. For the indigenous species, we documented the Anishinaabe names and uses. So we now have a database. If we want to use this as a teaching forest, we know the Anishinaabe plants. If we want to take out invasive species, we know which ones they are. I've drawn up a really big plan for the university that, let me do one more here. My Anishinaabe research assistant made this nice brochure, but I've drawn up a plan where there is space on the bottom of a hill in this area where we could have a small amphitheater. There is an open space between the road and the forest where we could have greenhouses and raised beds. We could have trees that grow flat along wrought iron fences so that they can be along a forest. We can have berry bush areas. I want to have a big open outdoor brick cooking oven for pizza, for bread, for food, a fire area and picnic tables. So we have a teaching area with an amphitheater, built-in seating on a hill. So we have a year-round teaching, learning, performing stage. We have year-round greenhouses. We have raised beds, fruit and berries. And then we have trails through the forest that will have interpretive signs in Anishinaabe and English. So I basically told one of the administrators here at the university, this is minimally 1.5 million, depending on how long it takes, it could go up to 5 or 6 million. And they said, great, let's start. So hopefully this, over the next 2 to 4 years, will become a space for ecotourism, a space for education, and a space for everybody to just come and enjoy food, to have community events. So the Terra Preta soil research grant is going to go on for the next 2 years. We will have 2 years of growing hopefully big, beautiful vegetables like this. And hopefully we'll be able to find a facility that can do the testing um, for us for the nutrient values. We're still working on that piece, but we're going to be testing soils. I'm trying to make sure that all of the water goes through a filtration system so that none of the water has chlorine or other chemicals in it. And with that, I'll take any questions. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Paulette. This is so interesting. I'm really, really excited about this work. I have so many questions, but before I ask, I will leave the floor open to other folks on the call. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Dr. Steve?
Um, I have a couple of questions. Um, so where you guys have done this archaeological work, digging up the Terra Preta soil in the Amazon, um, like, is it possible that they fired pottery and buried like intact pottery so that they could fill it with water, like some people do today for their gardens?
I'm not
Or
sure if they did or not, but they're along rivers in a very temperate area, so their issue was more often being flooded rather than not having water. But they did make very large pottery vessels for a reason, and that was to store foods, and they may have used them to store water. I haven't done the research in the Amazon. I've read all the papers and watched all the videos of the people that have done it. But in every area that they go into, they have found these, and you're talking about an inch thick, like really thick, big pottery. And
wow,
so that pottery that big and that keeps out rodents, keeps out moisture, keeps out everything. So if you wanted to store a food in there, it would be a great place to do it.
man. I also have other notes. So if they did in fact use broken pieces, I feel like because I've been looking into making pottery, and I guess a big part of it is sometimes when you're firing them, they'll split or they'll break, right? And that becomes a loss. But maybe they turn that loss into a resource, and the ones that split or crack, they're like, all right, let's shatter it and spread it throughout and make Terra Preta soil out of it, right? So it's no longer a loss; it's a resource. And
Yeah, they definitely used everything and they knew they were very connected to the land. So they knew that pottery would hold moisture. And they knew that, tiny insects or microorganisms, they knew about those things and they knew they were giving them a place to live in the soil, which would be really good. And we often forget that indigenous peoples have this very deep, deep level of knowledge about their environments they lived in. They saw everything. And if something, maybe somebody broke a pot at some point and things started growing off the side of it and they realized, oh, that's like a little house or that's like a space, but they somehow as much pottery as in that soil, there's a lot. Some places it's like 50%. They knew that it definitely benefited the soil and growing food.
wow. And another thing I'm thinking is, well, now that I've heard about the inch thick pottery, I want to attempt to do that. But also, I think if you wanted like big thick chunks, you could just fire, like make tubes of inch long clay um, rolls, I guess, and then fire those and break those up.
Yeah, yeah, you could even make just flat pieces and fire them and break them.
Nice. So, those are two parts of the terra preta soil. Is there anything else that's essential to it? The
Well,
coal.
you want a good amount of charcoal, a good amount of pottery, but you want a lot of organic compost. because there's a lot of richness in organic compost. And like I say, I didn't use what they call the worm tea. So people keep these little red wiggler worms and feed them, and they make worm poop, and then you soak the worm poop in water, like a tea, make a tea bag out of it, and that puts all the nutrients in the water. I didn't even use that in my first trial, and I still got a much bigger vegetables and much healthier weight to the crop. But we're going to try that now. So a lot of people do that, but there's a lot of information online now about Terra Preta, and there's lots of people that tell you how to make those, use those droppings from the worms to add nutrients to the soil.
I may have missed it.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks, Justin. Sorry. Is there a rough, is it, I may have missed it. Is it a third of those three, compost, charcoal, and pottery? Or is it best to just look online? Or is there a rough?
I think research is still being done on that.
Sure.
But looking at the original, like if you go watch that video that's on my first slide, and I did send the slide in,
Oh, very good.
they show examples of mounds of terra preta, and you will see how dense the pottery is, right? So if I could make enough pottery, I'd add a lot more to my soils. And this year I'm going to try and make more pottery. But I think as long as you have some in there, and I think we're trying to do it at 20% pottery and 30% charcoal and the rest compost and soil. I'd have to go to my many notes. But I think people are still kind of working that out. The one thing that it's important to know is that everywhere you go online now, and you look at Terra Preta, you find these ads for biochar, and people are trying to make biochar. They're trying to see how they can make enough for the forest. And the indigenous people didn't make biochar. They made charcoal, right? We're making biochar because now our soils are so depleted. I mean, the original base dirt, I had my poor driveway and house. I had 2 dump truck loads of dirt on my driveway when I started this. But those base soils were some of the poorest soils I'd ever seen, and they were the best that were available in northern Ontario. They were sandy. Some of them were full of chopped up garbage. Like they were just terrible. I grew up in BC. You dig in the soil there and you find nice dirt. You dig in the soil here in the north and you find rocks and clay. Like we don't have a lot of areas of really good soil. So we do really need to add to our base soils here if we want to address food security in a good way.
Yeah, to kind of build off of that, if I were to do your explanation of the gravel soil is exactly what I had trucked in for my raised beds, and I'm trying to create, a functional soil system out of it. A couple questions, you'd mentioned the pottery, and I'm assuming the glaze that goes on to, most pottery that you're going to buy today, I'm assuming that would make that kind of pottery not the right choice for this kind of work. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't use glazed pottery. So I try to stick to what I see as the original recipe, and it was wood-fired clay and sand or clay and shell pottery. I take broken cups and teacups and glazed pottery and I smash it up and I put it in the bottom of my houseplants because it creates a drainage area. So if you have a bunch of broken pottery, I think you can use it in the bottom of your bed along with wood. But for the soil and to enrich the soil, you want a natural wood-fired pottery.
Okay.
I have more questions, but Justin, if you have any other questions, or does anyone else have anything they'd like to ask or share?
Um,
I was curious to know what kind of wood you would be using to make the charcoal. Is there like a species of wood that's better or some that you should be avoiding?
I don't think there's any you should avoid. And I think what was originally brought to me was like pine and maple. Some woods are harder, and they say the harder woods might make better charcoal. For my research project, I'm buying a pre-made what they call block charcoal. I think it's hemlock and oak. But I think any wood, so if you watch that video and you look at what the indigenous people did, they used every species of tree in their environment to make the charcoal for their Terra Preta. So it's using what you have. And one of the benefits of that is that things know where they belong. The trees know where they belong. Animals and plants know where they belong. And some communities have tried to grow corn in specific areas, Indian corn. And when indigenous peoples were moved, they tried to grow their Indian corn where they were moved to, and it wouldn't grow. That's because the corn knew that wasn't its home soil. So there's an indigenous belief that things do really well when they know they're with their family members. So a lot with this one indigenous group, they farmers that now have their traditional homelands said they wanted to try to grow their corn for them when they learned that it wouldn't grow in the new area where the indigenous people had been moved to. So they gave the farmers seeds, and guess what? They had the biggest crop of indigenous corn you'd ever seen because the corn went home to where it came from. So it sounds not really clear for a lot of people, but everything knows where home is, right? And I don't want to import wood from BC or anywhere else. I don't want to import biochar from anywhere else. I want to use what belongs here to make a soil for here. And in that way, too, anybody else replicating this, so I hope this will be replicated for a lot of First Nations. Anyone wanting to make Terra Preta will realize and know and benefit from having everything they need to make it right there in their area. And that's one of the things that when I started this, we're always asked, oh, don't you want intellectual property? And, you can sell this. No, I don't. I want everyone to have food. I want everyone to know they can make this for basically free with what they have and have more food. And that's how you really make food security, is by making something of great benefit to be very little to no cost, right? So hopefully that will move on, but I need to go back to another meeting. So
Okay, thank
thank you
you.
all for inviting me.
It was a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much, Paulette. And we'll share, as we mentioned before, this is recorded, so we will be sharing this online, and we'll point you towards some of the other resources that Dr. Steves has shared. So yeah, we got you, Marcy, Paulette. This is really awesome work you're doing.
Bye.
Take care.